I want to talk a little bit about the problem with beliefs and ideology. In many ways, our beliefs are cover-ups for what is true. Beliefs are things that we hold as true or false without actually knowing whether they are true or false. And with this comes all sorts of problems that most people are blind to, unfortunately. So in this video, I want to make you a little bit more aware about what those problems actually are. So first, I gotta give you a little bit of context about your own life. Growing up, you did not form your own worldview consciously. Instead, you actually hypnotically absorbed from your environment in order to relate to people properly, get approval, and just survive within that environment. Children do not have much of an ability to consciously discern what they allow into their worldview. And in many cases, childhood acts as the psychological foundation for your life. It's not really fixed. You can go back, you can do therapy and meditation and shadow work and consciousness work, and you can change a lot of stuff. But without doing any of that, it just stays there. Most people, their childhood just acts as the psychological foundation for their life. They don't really change very much. They kind of just keep going and keep going and keep going with the flow of life. And in many ways, we were conditioned with very dogmatic, very extreme, very closed-minded beliefs, whether they're religious or scientific. And yes, science is grounded upon all sorts of assumptions and beliefs, whether they're political, whether they're just philosophical or moral. In many ways, these are the things that impacted our entire sense-making apparatus to a very deep level, all the way to the point where we cannot really consciously see the depth at which it is actually doing this. We kind of just take our worldview for granted. We take life for granted. We take our current sense-making skills for granted. So the thing about beliefs is that they infect your sense-making apparatus. They do not allow you to actually properly make sense of the world, especially if you are more dogmatic and closed-minded. If you're completely sucked into one ideology as just the true ideology, you're screwed. Your mind is now incapable of properly exploring reality in a meaningful and healthy way. It's going to be too stuck on this one set of ideas, and it's kind of just going to be acting as a pattern. And that set of ideas can be religious, scientific, political, moral, or philosophical, any set of ideas. And a lot of us were conditioned with specific views about politics. This is just a good example that I'm just spontaneously bringing up. And growing up, we were kind of born, in a particular environment. Most people were born and their parents were left-wing or right-wing. And a lot of them kind of just go on to support the party that their upbringing kind of taught them to support. And there's massive psychological differences in liberals and conservatives, or the left wing and the right wing, and people across the entire spectrum. And in many ways, when we're stuck in our beliefs, we cannot actually properly make sense of people who are different from us as well. We can't actually understand why someone is more liberal or why someone is more conservative. Instead, basically, our sense-making apparatus goes to they're crazy or they're stupid. We don't really understand the underlying mechanics that are going on. Like, how does their mind work? How does a value system work? How do they actually perceive reality? People who are conservative tend to actually perceive reality in pretty different ways from people who are liberal, and vice versa. And this actually leads to all sorts of disagreements on policy, what we should be doing, what a good future actually looks like. Not to mention there's different levels of consciousness as well. There's different levels of value systems, different levels of identity and ego development, different levels of morals. And not everyone is actually at the same sort of stage of development. And this leads to massive differences in worldview, which can cause a lot of conflict without understanding, the differences between people and how they go about interpreting reality. So beliefs kind of close you down into one framework, and you filter life through that framework. And the thing is that beliefs become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whether they're limiting beliefs or political ones or religious ones, reality is going to reflect your beliefs back to you. Now we'll swap to limiting beliefs. So if you have a limiting belief that says you're not attractive, This is going to make you feel less confident, make you feel less energized, make you struggle when it comes to social situations and putting yourself out there. And no one's going to find you attractive because this belief is controlling certain emotions and behaviors, and it kind of just goes round and round and round. So you're going to have this belief of I'm attractive, I'm unattractive, and I have this low self-worth and, whatever. And it's going to, basically, reality is going to reflect that back to you. And it's easy to kind of just like continuously believe it when reality just reflects it back to you over and over and over again, right? But what's going on is that basically you're filtering reality through this one lens, and it's just reinforcing itself continuously. And you actually have to see these patterns and actually learn how to break out of them, or else your mind will stay stuck in them until you die. So life reflects back to us what we believe to be true. If someone believes that Jesus is the only Lord and Savior, then they're going to be filtering reality through that lens, and they are going to start justifying 1,000 reasons as to why Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior and nothing else is true and everything is just Jesus. And it's going to be the same thing for scientifically minded people. If all they think of is it's just genes, it's just atoms, it's just matter, they're going to just go around in this loop because this is how their mind has been conditioned to think. This is how their sense-making apparatus works. The very foundations of how their mind makes sense of reality is, like I said, it's infected with these beliefs. That's why in my videos, I really advocate for studying hundreds of perspectives. I advocate for actually being a very multi-perspectival human and building a mind that can sort of juggle perspectives almost like a juggler, kind of juggling balls, throws them up, lets them go. You kind of want your mind to get to the point where you can look through a perspective, take it off, and then, grab another perspective, and then it's like that easy. And this doesn't mean that all perspectives are simply equal. That itself is another perspective. Some perspectives reflect reality in more accurate ways than others. So I can have the perspective that there's a blue kangaroo dancing in, the White House, for example. I'm not in the White House. I'm not looking at the White House. I don't know if there's a blue kangaroo in there right now. But odds are, there probably isn't. Odds are that doesn't reflect reality very accurately. So not every idea, not every experience, not every level of consciousness, not every state of consciousness is the same. Different ones can make sense of reality better, and different ones just reflect reality in a more accurate way. Typically what happens is we completely confuse our perspective with what is true. Like this is just like across the board what humans are doing. Unless they have actually been able to self-actualize and begin really transcending the ego, basically transcending themselves and their very limited perspective, their very limited patterns, they're just kind of stuck in them, which is itself another perspective. But it's a very accurate perspective. This is a major reason as to why there's so much conflict in the world, why we feel so disconnected from each other, why we actually can't understand each other. There's a lot of reasons, but that's just one, right? That's one more perspective. Another really important thing to say is that your mind clings to ideas. Your mind forms an attachment around them. Your mind forms an identity with them. This is why people say things like, I am a liberal, I am a conservative, I am an atheist, I am a Christian, I am, and then my beliefs. You identify with them. They literally become a part of who you believe you are. And when they are questioned, you actually have a physiological survival response. Like your heartbeat can increase, you can get tense and angry, and there's cortisol, like the stress hormone that's kind of flowing through you. You feel threatened, right? Like your actual life is in danger. And this is especially useful growing up because when we're exposed to ideas growing up, like I said, we're hypnotically taking them in. We're not really discerning very much. A child's mind doesn't really have the ability to do that. They're in a really hypnotic state almost of just taking in. So when we take something in, our mind sort of clamps down on it. Like it fills up an empty space in our mind and we start clamping in on it and holding it there. And it just becomes a very rigid pattern until we can become aware and challenge them and let them go and create new patterns. And people's beliefs really determine a lot of what their life is oriented around. Like a scientist, for example, has an entire career around being a scientist. And there's certain assumptions within science, and there's a lot of beliefs within science. And to begin to question those, yeah, if you're a scientist and your entire career is based on science, that can be very hard because this is how you're surviving. If you're a politician working for either party, right, to really begin to spot the limitations within your own belief system is really hard because this is how you survive. In order to actually do that, you need to develop a lot of self-honesty. Even YouTubers fall into this trap. They've built a giant audience around a certain set of beliefs, and to actually admit to the audience, like, hey guys, I was wrong about this, like, people don't do that. People do not do that stuff. People just keep going with it. This is how they survive. They aren't conscious enough to really reflect deeply. They're not really conscious enough to even admit to themselves they're wrong. And then to actually go on camera and say like, hey guys, I was wrong. Like, that's a hard thing to do. Like, your entire life, the entire organization of your life is going to change if you really begin to value what is true, and not just as like a corny saying of like the truth, but like you really and sincerely want to align your life with truth. So beliefs have a massive role in what you structure your life around. And this is very obvious when you just look out into culture, right? And how people organize, their political careers or their scientific ones or their religious ones or their medical careers or whatever. A lot of fields basically are impacted by people's beliefs, like practically every single one. There's no escaping having beliefs as a human being and escaping the impacts they actually have on your life. Another major problem with beliefs is that you think you have everything figured out. And this is a massive trap within science. This is one of the biggest ones, is that a lot of people fall into the trap of, we kind of know what reality is. We can keep doing the scientific method. And then, what we don't know, we'll just kind of know in like 100 years. We make this assumption that we know how everything works. We know what everything is. And notice that we've done this time and time again through history. We did this with Newtonian physics. We did this with germ theory. We did this with the existence of meteorites. We did this with the theory of evolution. We did this with quantum mechanics. We did this with Galileo. We did this with, I believe, like tectonic plates. We've done this with all sorts of stuff where we thought we had everything figured out. And if we just kind of do more of the same, then we'll just kind of have the answers, which in many cases has been proven wrong time and time again. And there's quite a lot of methods for actually getting valid knowledge into the nature of self or reality. For example, Buddhism, thousands of years ago, discovered the truth of no self. Science has only very recently discovered that to be true through sort of objective ways. That's very debatable if reality is even objective. That's another belief that science holds. You really have to begin to understand that like every major worldview is very deeply founded on certain behaviors, certain patterns, just inherent limitations, and just beliefs and assumptions. And you really need to be very honest and just sincere when it comes to questioning them. It's not about tearing them down. It's not about making them look bad so that you can like rise above them. It's not this like guerrilla game of who has the most power. It's about just like what is true. Right? And I know I talked quite a bit about science in this video. I love science, but there are inherent limitations to science. Like it's overly rational, it's overly analytical, it's completely dependent upon just empirical evidence, assuming that everything that's true can simply be proven in this materialist empirical way, which personally, I don't really think so. Just given by personal experiences I've had with enlightenment and awakening and meditation, there's certain things that are true that will not fall inside of the mainstream scientific way of going about what is true. There are certain things that are true that cannot be proven using strictly materialist methods. So every single belief system comes with the belief that you understand how life works. You understand what it is? And most of life is completely invisible. You haven't even exposed yourself to the majority of life. It would be far wiser to recognize that you don't really know anything. If I were to ask you what a water bottle is, you'll say, oh, it's a water bottle and I can use it to fill up liquid and drink out of it. right? And if I ask you to explain what it's made out of, and you say atoms, and what's that made out of, and we can keep going down, eventually you're going to be very confused about what it's made out of. You're probably very confused about what atoms are, how they behave. Like, dominantly, everything is completely unknown to you. There's a lot of things that are sort of taken for granted by you that you believe you know, that you have no idea about. For example, when Isaac Newton, that very classic story of the apple falling from the tree and hitting him on the head, right? When that happened, he had a major insight. And every single person knew that when things fall, they fall down. That was very common. That was very obvious. But what he understood was that things do not fall left. They do not fall right. They do not fall up. Things fall down. He understood there's something doing this. There's some kind of force. And that led him to inquiring into gravity. Personally, I find, I'm just saying a personal thing from my life right now. Personally, I find science to be really difficult to talk about because this is the mainstream way of making sense of the world. This is the exact thing that most people in the Western world, their sense-making process has been sort of conditioned with. So to really begin questioning that, yeah, that can be very threatening to a lot of people. To begin questioning the limits of science can be pretty overwhelming. And you can just talk to ChatGPT. Just ask it, what are the limits to science? It will give you a list of the limits to science. Like, they exist. They're very real. You can check out books like Science Set Free by Rupert Sheldrake, or The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, or Why Materialism is Baloney by Bernardo Kastrup, or Evolution as a Religion. There's all sorts of problems within every single worldview. No worldview is just like this collection of facts that are just true and they can't be like disputed against or recontextualized. Every theory is subject to change. Every theory, every bit of understanding that we have is subject to evolve, be expanded upon, or be proven false, or be put into a completely different context that radically changes how we go about interpreting what we believe is true. So the problem of discovering what is true is far more complicated than looking through a microscope, seeing a cell, and then like just going like, oh, okay, this is true. Like, it really begins to bring into question your own mind, how you go about making sense of reality, how like how the structure of your psyche even works. It becomes very personal. There's no avoiding your own subjectivity. That's another problem within science, is that it tries to completely avoid subjectivity, which is a major habit that it has done. This impacts medicine. This impacts how we go about understanding the natural world. And like I said, guys, I really love science. If me talking about science bothers you, just go talk to ChatGPT about the problems of science. Like, actually just do an honest inquiry using that AI and just read a bunch of the books that I actually just told you about. They exist. Science is deeply limited. Science deals with purely objective material existence. There's a lot more to existence than strictly materialism. Any good scientist would probably really agree with me that, yeah, there's probably inherent limitations to materialism. So that's it for this video. I kind of ranted against science a little bit. Hope I'm not pissing anyone off with that. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got value out of it. Take it easy.